Hello and welcome to the Inquisitorial Archive. My name is Kevin Rourke and today I'm going to tell you about the 13th Kinog Grenadiers 7th session, my ongoing Only War campaign. This session the players started off still recovering from the previous mission. I let a week or two pass by while they heal up, particularly Sergeant McBrander, who had received a bionic eye covering roughly a third of his face, a third of his head. Their new captain summoned them all in, and he welcomed them in for breakfast, and I described the food, which the players seem to really like. They're like, oh, they're just because this guy actually cooks food for himself because it's a personal quirk or role for him. They really prefer this guy over the other guy because this guy's like, oh, it seems a lot less formal, but at the same time they're respecting the boundaries there because they know that he is still a captain. But they're to be given two different assignments. Medic Blackthrone was to be sent off to another facility for a short period, and they were to be interviewed along with several other people. They were to be interviewed for the Kinog Chronicle, which I described them as sort of akin to the New York Times or National Geographic or Time magazine back home in their homeworld. So this is obviously going to be used as some kind of propaganda. The players were happy enough with this. And without further ado, we went on to for the reason that Medic Blackthrone wasn't being put there. So his player wasn't there, and also because Commander kind of taking a look at him now after what he did at the Subsector Governor's Palace. The player unfortunately isn't there, so I don't want to just completely write off, but I get the feeling the player is going to start showing up less and less. He's missed over half the sessions out at this stage, so we're going to have to bring that up. I don't mind people missing a few sessions, but he's got a lot of stuff going on. It's getting to a stage where do you have enough time for the game, because it's getting awkward explaining why your character either isn't there or the guys want to talk to him about certain things he's done, but the player isn't there. Anyway, that will all be dealt with in future, I hope. They were each interviewed independently, starting with Sergeant McBrander, and they asked him a few things about, how he was getting on the Imperial Guard, how things were going, and he gave them, of course, appropriate responses. And then they threw a curveball at him towards the end. They asked how he felt about the rumours from Homeworld, which he had not heard yet. In fact, none of them had heard yet, that the Department of Munitorum was putting pressure on the Homeworld to raise another regiment. But the 12th had been raised unexpectedly quite soon, on a short term, and there were the next generation of nobles, so to speak. A lot of them, you've got some, but none of them make a full regiment. So that there was some suggestions by some people that a lowborn regiment should be raised, the first one of Kinog's history. And Sergeant McBrander thought on this for a moment, and he gave a very calculated response, because with some of the events that have been going on, the players have started to realise the politics could be far more dangerous than the orcs at times. So, with this in mind, Sergeant McBrander said that, of course, he preferred the tradition was upheld, and he was not particularly in favour of these things. However, he would support any decision the Department of Munitorum made. It would be a sacrifice, but it would be a sacrifice that he would be willing to make if the Emperor willed it. Through the means of the Department of Munitorum, he would be willing to accept this. But he would prefer if this outcome did not come about. After this, he went out and he warned everyone over the box. He's like, take this line, say, you can say what you want, but say that we will support the Department of Munitorum. He was very obvious, he did not want to get in trouble with the Department of Munitorum. They're extremely wary of them, because they know the amount of power that the Department of Munitorum as an aspect of the Administratum has. He's being very close and tiptoeing around all sorts of eggshells when it comes to them. So the various players went in, they told him, one of the biggest upsets before they went here was I think possibly the second biggest upset of the session, I'd say. Probably actually for the player in question, his character and the character in question, probably bigger than this actual lowborn, the prospect of a lowborn unit being raised. Trooper Love had, initially early on, I described everyone's heads were getting shaved because they're joining the Imperial Guard. And I said, well, you're not really going to be allowed to grow facial hair, but officers might let it off. But he had grown a moustache. He's not a sergeant, he's not an officer, so it's not really allowed. This is the approach I'm taking with their particular regiment. But their captain had been turning a blind eye, as had their sergeant. But the captain decided, because they're being interviewed by the Kinog Chronicle, he can't, you know, he's going to have to shave it off. He can go back later. But this really deeply upset the character, because like, no, he was very upset. You could see, like, no, you know, he was desperately, he made a case, and he made a pretty, actually, you know, decent case, and was obviously very upset. So he kind of tugged on the heartstrings of the captain a bit. And it's like, okay, well, it's like, you know, you did made a pretty good case, so I'm going to give you a roll on this. You're gonna get this much of a bonus because, well, you've actually done you actually did some decent role playing there. So yeah, he rolls and he does quite well. So the captain goes, okay, and he writes him a dispensation. He's official dispensation now. He's allowed a mustache as long as Sergeant McBrander doesn't have a problem with it. At any point, Sergeant McBrander says you shaved it off. He has to shave it off, or anyone with a captain rank or higher tells him to shave it off. I was like, okay. But in the interviews we had, it's very interesting moments with some of the different player characters. Like, oh, they, you know, heard some of the stories, like, and a lot of these stories are things the players haven't done. Some of them are, and they're twisted versions of these stories. Really, the legend around the group has continued to grow, and there's so many myths and legends going around about them now that it's hard for outsiders to tell fact from fiction. But one of the particularly interesting things that came forward was the journalist asked Commissar Barca, was like, did he find it difficult to think that he was originally from Kinog himself, which none of the player characters knew, or the players themselves aside from him. How did this create any barriers or difficulties? And he was not happy about this. He said, no, of course it doesn't. And afterwards, he started doing some digging up. He was not happy. He was, you know, he was getting information sent back to the Skull Project. He was trained, and he wanted to know where the hell she had found this up. And he checked around locally as well. No one knew if she'd found this up. So there must be some clues left on Kinog. And as pointed out later on, she might not have known for certain. She might have found it on Kinog stuff that would lead her to suspicion, but she only asked there to confirm it. So now she has her confirmation. That might be something that could show up later on. Who knows? But he wasn't particularly happy. But we ended up with some cool bits. I was just like talking to the various people how they went on. We had Engineer Kasugi's player was there for the first half of the session, and we ended up with some cool bits. But as well as this, at the end, I asked you guys to describe, okay, you're being asked to stand for a couple picture. Some of them are like, you know, sort of, you're standing stoically or whatever way you want to deal with it, or some of them are kind of more actiony kind of type scenes. So you have, you know, Commissar Barker with the bolt pistol in his hand, kind of turning over his shoulders at the ship, and they did all these pictures individually with the guys. They were like, no, we're not going to take pictures of you. We're going to do it individually, and then we can, you know, move you around. Effectively doing Photoshop, that kind of thing. You can move you around, and he's like, yeah. So you got all the guys doing these cool different poses, and the guys kind of got into like describing how their guys were doing. So, you know, Trooper Love was standing there with the flamer in one hand, just like standing up here, like, yeah. And I described, and when they saw the picture later on that this was put into, they had photoshopped in the flaming body of what was obviously meant to be an orc, but all of its features were burnt off. It was just crisp. It was like, so obviously taking some stock footage of some kind of large humanoid that had been burnt, and it was still burning like in front of him, as if it had almost got in, but he just flamed it down and he'd taken it down. So I said to them, okay, you're going to be we're going to go forward a couple of months. We're going to go forward about a year, and you guys are still doing missions in the meantime, but they're very low down. They're generally okay. There's not a big plot points. There's any stuff, and some of the players like basically said to me, well, my character will be doing this in the meantime, doing these different things. Like, okay, fine. And we progressed from that point. But I said to you, you're getting a bit of extra logistics ratings because you're in this article. It's not the only people in the article. When later on they got to saw the Kinog Chronicle, they got to see the cover, they had photoshopped them in, as well as they had photoshopped in some kind of storm preacher they'd never met. And there were other people they had interviewed. And for a second I was like, oh yeah, I'll put in a sanctioned psyker. And then I stopped at the last second, I was like, they wouldn't put a sanctioned psyker on the cover this more than likely, even if he was from Kinog. I just don't see it happening, at least at this point. And then they've got, you know, the one beam blade, they've got the entire regiment, they've got like its commander standing there, you know, and on the back, on the skyline, they've superimposed the image of the colonel, like face kind of looking down and actually backing the ball, you know, supervising everything, that kind of type thing. So it's like, okay, the guys are cool. But then they started to read the article, and the article was partly heavily edited and partly absolute fabrication. Some of the tales I started attributing to them and saying that they were fact is pretty obvious that it's like, yeah, you didn't even say this, they didn't mention any of this stuff to you guys. Some of this information is clearly something they've gotten from another source, might be real, and I kind of said, yeah, you might have heard 1 or 2 of these stories that somebody else's squad did, but they're trying to build you up so much, you're trying to be poster boys, and they're really trying to show up, you know, they're building you guys up so much, and the other guys are being interviewed for this thing. But what really upset them was the fact that it said, oh, obviously it's the raising of low-born units are a controversial subject, but it edited and outright fabricated in certain areas that overall they were in favour of these units being raised. And this is months obviously after they've been printed off and shown off in the homeworld, so they're kind of going, our families have seen these things, and because it's such a big thing, because they're all nobles and they're all going like, our families have seen these, they know what these are like. The person who took it the best was Corporal Jorgensen, because he ultimately, his goal has always been to be a poster boy, and now the unit as a whole are effectively poster boys, but he's one of the ones who's sticking out a bit more for various different reasons. Sergeant McBrander is probably coming up the lead because he's a sergeant, he's a leader type character, but he wasn't as upset as the others, but they were all upset to varying degrees. Like, you know, this isn't right that they're, and it seemed pretty obvious, and they asked their commanders, like, Sergeant McBrander went off and asked the commander, and he said, did you do this? Did you know they were going to do this? And he's like, I didn't. I knew they were going to do something, but not to this extent. This is a very big deal. And shortly after this, a couple of weeks after this, they got an astropathic message. Some of the various players started looking out to try and find more information. Commissar Barca had basically sent a message to the Department of Munitorum, and it was said in a very specific, reasonable way, like, you know, I don't think it's right that this woman should be detailing where I came from, especially since the troops don't know about this. They shouldn't know about this. You know, he feels he's earned his place to fight with this unit, but he thinks it could be potentially difficult. They might, you know, so he phrased it in a very good way. So the Department of Munitorum obviously stepped in and took that bit out. Obviously, you know, Sergeant McBrander goes off and he's like, I'd like to try and find out about who the hell was this the Kinog Chronicle, or was this Department of Munitorum who made these extensive changes? And he spent a bit of a while asking questions of various people, and he eventually found out from a Department of Munitorum guy who wouldn't confirm it, but he said that he had seen similar pieces of work before, and this one had a certain air to it that he would think was more familiar with some of the writings that he hadn't seen the Kinog Chronicle. He phrased it in such a way as this, and Sergeant Brenner's like, well, okay, obviously it's for the good of the God Emperor, but I'm not too happy about it. But he knows well enough to keep it going. And they saw, because they had grown to a position of respect amongst the other squads, even some people who were higher ranked than them, behind closed doors, they were obviously looking up to them, because the squad, the immortal Sergeant Brenner, had never lost a soldier. But there was a loss of respect in the eyes of those around him. Sergeant McBrander organised a meeting with some of the other officers. Oh, not officers, some of the other sergeants. People he knew who would talk. People who he knew who would spread the word. Not introverts, people who would talk about these things about it. And he made a good speech about how these words were taken out of context. These words were not all that they had said. He was very careful about this stuff because obviously he doesn't want the department to be informed to come down and said to him. But he said, obviously, it seems like this is still behind closed doors. Enough comments there, but this is obviously the Department of Muirtorm needs these troops. If this is the way they're going with it, and that they just have to unfortunately accept it, that this is the way the wind is blowing, and they have to live with it. And it's not the way he would have done it, but this kind of allayed a lot of the issues on a local level. But I point out, yeah, they're going to talk and things, but as it gets further and further away from me, and it could be more difficult for contacts to be made, you may end up with people from the 13th, God help you, the 12th, because there's going to be very little contact between them, the 12th, who may read this, who will see as traitors, specifically as the players are saying class traitors. It's very interesting because the players are really getting interested in the playing nobles and being all just looking at, like they don't have as much of an issue with lowborns serving the guard from other worlds. They accept that, that's their traditions. But from Kinog, serving off-world in the Imperial Guard, it is, as I think Sergeant Brander's player said, it's like, in his character's eyes, the problem is they haven't earned it. There was, not everyone who's noble got into the 13th Kinog. There was more of a problem with resources, but it was like there were still many nobles who didn't meet the mark, so everyone of the nobility is lower down, and they naturally assume, being nobles and raised in this kind of environment, that they are better than these commoners. And you know, he said quantity over quality. He thinks we're better off just waiting and raising the 14th Kinog. And even if that takes a few years, the quality will be far better than the quantity. So, but then after a few weeks, like I said, Captain called back in, but this time there was no food. It was particularly grim. I came in, and he informed me he run their whole squad. He's like, he was with other squads, he was just calling in their sergeants, but not here. For them, for the Immortals, he asked all of them to come in, and he explained that they've received word from the homeworld that the 1st Kinog Light Infantry were to be raised, a lowborn unit, and that the Department of Muirtorm and their own government had requested volunteers from members of different from members of the 13th and 12th to come back to become officers and sergeants, etc. in these units. And you know, they obviously could get a position of quite importance if they went back. And he had to ask them. He explained it. I have to ask you if you wish to volunteer for this duty, if any of you wish to go back. And they all said no. And of course, they were all, you know, outraged and disheartened. And we got some great role playing for the guys who are like, you know, this is wrong. That these people haven't earned it. There's obviously some nobles back in Homeworld who didn't make the cut, and they're going to be obviously officers in this new regiment, and they're going to be delighted because they wouldn't have been off otherwise. But they're like, this is just not right in their eyes. As Trooper Love said, I don't think you're going to get any volunteers from anyone in the 13th. He said, I think you're right, there may be one or two who wish to go for higher office, but the way the orders bring down, I have to ask everyone for volunteers, and if I don't meet the quota, which I don't expect to, because the Department of Muirtorm doesn't understand, I have to fill in those quotas places. There will be others higher up making the decision. And he was giving a strong indication that there's a pretty good chance that Sergeant McBrander and the guys would potentially be dragged back home, for as they'd see it a dishonourable duty, even if they get a higher rank, even if Sergeant McBrander was suddenly made a captain. It's not what they were moving towards. It is an insult to them and their families as far as they are concerned. This is not right. This is not a just reward. This is an insult to them and everyone who has served in the Kinog Grenadiers from 1st to 13th. But yes, they asked their captain, how long do you think it will be before they've basically start forcing people to go? He said, I'd say within the week. So the players started to consider how can we deal with this? And there was a number of options. As some people have mentioned after the session, well, they could have contacted the subsector governor and tried to get position in the PDF, because even though they'd be commanding low-born units, they wouldn't be from Kinog. That's the real sticking point. It would be a dishonour to them. It would be a mark against them. So Sergeant McBrander came up with an idea. He realised, wait a second, do you remember when we were protecting the Promethean refinery before that we had saved a stormtrooper and a stormtrooper sergeant in a squad, and the stormtrooper sergeant approached Sergeant McBrander and said, someday if I'm ever in a position I'll repay the favour. So Sergeant McBrander said, if we are indisposed for the rest of the week, somewhere far away, somewhere on some covert operation, we can effectively miss this draft, because they do not want to be shamed by joining this dishonourable organisation as they see it. And he went off and he sent a message off to this stormtrooper sergeant. I'm like, not much related to that, but I'll see. I roll my D100, it comes up at a 3. I'm like, okay, wow, they're actually after doing something, so I had to come up with something completely on the fly. I had a few stray idle notions, but we're talking about like a 1 sentence sort of plot seed here that I had to put, and I was like, okay, this one's going to be appropriate. It's going to be appropriately difficult, it's going to make sense, because whatever they're going to do, it's got to mean something. I can't just, go, oh yeah, you walk away, you're putting patrol for a week or 2. No, this has got to be something significant, so that the department, they're outside of the reach of the Department of Neutron itself during this period. And the Stormtrooper Sergeant isn't necessarily a bad connection, and he rolled a 3. So yeah, that's pretty good. Sergeant McBrander and the guys then went off to talk. They were summoned by the captain. The captain informed that he had received orders for them that they would be leaving that night. And they were asking, well, what are we going to do? He's like, I don't know. I haven't been authorized to know about this. All I know is that you're gone. It's like, will we be coming back afterwards? Like, I don't know. I'm being kept in the dark about this. So this got him a bit worried. A black Valkyrie with no identification numbers on the side landed. It was piloted by servitors, and they got on. It was an appropriate time, it had all the correct clearances. They got on and they left, and they started going up Dixie notice, but they kept going up. They went into orbit. They went onto a ship, and they were met with, there's a lot of servitors walking around, and the vast majority of the people they saw walking around had slightly glazed over vacant look while they did their duties, like they weren't all there. It was very odd. But they met someone called Agent Black, who they're supposed to report to, and she had them remove all their gear and they did the strip, and they were brought into another room where a doctor inspected them and made sure they were all physically fit for whatever duties they were to attend to. And they were all just, for nobles this was a very odd procedure as far as they saw it, but they accepted it. They kind of twigged what was going on to a certain degree. Then a guy came along with a hose and just hosed them down, and then they came along with powder and just basically throwing delousing powder. And for nobles it's like, what? But they, for whatever reason, this is a procedure that they assume was delousing powder. It might not have been, but all of their fancy dried quail rations and different things were removed, and she removed a lot of the equipment she saw as unnecessary for the mission. This woman had a bionic arm, she had a bolt pistol, a power sword, and she just identified herself as Agent Black. That was it. And the guys accept this, but they're like, their captain before they left had made them a tray of, they'd made up 2 trays of brownies, and she'd taken these away. Like, and Sergeant Brown said it might be good for morale if I take these. And he made a pretty good spiel list. So I was like, okay, you can take these back, but you're not bringing them with you tomorrow. You've got to eat them tonight. So like, okay. They're all getting pretty nervous at this point. Out of character, the guys had a fair idea of what was going on. Didn't know where they'd be going next, but they knew this was going to be bad. And they were told the next day that a series of ship transports going away from the Spinner front had been attacked, possibly by heretic pirates, possibly by Xenos, or possibly those under a more malefic influence, didn't know. But the common trait amongst all these is all of them at least contained a number of bodies of Imperial Guardsmen who were being brought back to their homeworlds for burial. Usually this is going to be the Clixa sector units, because their transport's not necessarily that big of a thing. But this is the situation they were thrown into, and that they were going to be put into a cargo container, and they were given small and more compact rations, which tasted horrible, but they were given some additional equipment, like the squad was given a melt-a-gun and a flamer. And Sergeant Brander asked, what is this going? And another piece of technology didn't recognise, which she later explained, these are stummers, which effectively will cancel out a certain amount of noise for a short period. So they were pretty, I was like, okay. He's like, well, why this equipment? Why specifically reading this equipment? She's like, well, in the event we're doing shipboard combat, the flamer will be handy in the narrow corridors. And the melt-a-gun can be handy for bypassing doors or bulkheads. They're also given void suits. But we had to roleplay out that they were on, for about 3 or 4 weeks, they were stuck inside in this kind of cargo container, on the back of a truck or a lorry. And they had some odd experiences as it was moved from one ship to another, and they experienced weightlessness for a while. But eventually, they just had to sit and wait. There was very low lighting, extremely low. And the food, as I described it to them, they're like, okay, what are our nude rations? Like the stuff she's given us, what did they taste like? I said, okay, imagine you dried noodles. As noodles, you just took them out of the packet, like for your super noodles or pot noodles or whatever. You got those. And somebody had covered them in dust, and you're eating it. That is the culinary experience you have been set in for. So they continued going on, and they were like, okay, this is not thrilling, but it's definitely taken us out of the beyond the reach of the Mutorm as far as they're concerned. And Sergeant Brenda asked, if, when we're done here, will we be returning back to our to Guard, our previous unit? And Agent Black said, if you survive, more than likely, yes. She was being very standoffish before the mission. As I said to players, it might be because she doesn't expect all you guys to come back, so she doesn't want to get in any way emotionally involved with you. It's like, alright. But eventually, she was spending a lot of time she's got kind of an earbud in her ear, and she spent a lot of time looking over a data slate of some kind. And Commissar Barker said, oh, we've got to see something else. If you want, I could look over if I could monitor this, whatever it is you're monitoring. And she's like, no, that won't be necessary. It's like, no way, that's going to happen. But the squad, eventually, she told them to get to attention, raid themselves, raid their equipment, put their armour on and things. Because they obviously been sitting there for weeks with just their armour on the whole time. Then another ship had shown up and was making making a trajectory to intercept with them. So she had all the guys raid their gear. She warned them to cover their eyes as they saw the doors opening, because they were very, very extremely low lighting, but their eyes would adjust. Didn't want particularly, they need to be able to see, but didn't necessarily need to see by much light. So after a couple of weeks in this thing with really tiny light, this was really blinding. So for a couple of seconds they're like, she didn't. As I explained to them, she actually had photo contacts. So I didn't say she had photo contacts, but no, this wasn't necessarily a problem for her. But after this point, they moved through the ship, and every now and again she's like, okay, our mission is, first off, I want to capture one of these invaders, or at least take them alive, preferably, if not dead. They're like, okay. And okay, she's reading them along. It became pretty obvious that with her data set and the whatever earbud she had, she was monitoring the security systems of the ship. And she informed them, yes, the attackers appear to be human, but they could still be under Xenos or Malefic influence, so to beware. And occasionally they heard las fire or whatever up ahead, and she'd stop from it, and she'd check the data slate, and she'd obviously be checking with some kind of information from the security systems, and she'd direct away from it, because there's still only, like 11 of them. She's not having them all, she's not going to get the guys killed for no good reason. She needs a chance of success. But eventually she comes to an area where, yeah, no, there's a small number of them here. And when they see these guys, these guys appear to have some kind of maces hanging off their waists. They have autoguns, and they have light enforcer carapace, so the guys are like, this is some really heavy hardware for a bunch of pirates. Like they kind of got in some ways better gear than in certain areas you could argue they've got better gear, particularly once they start firing and the guys realize these auto guns are filled up man stop rounds, which means they go from having a penetration of 0 to a penetration of 3, so it's a lot more threatening. One or two of the guys almost died. But when they came across the scene, they saw these guys, a couple of them were keeping basically watch over there and they'd killed a couple of the armsmen and crew of the ship. And one of them had his knife out and was slitting the throat of a guy on the ground. So obviously very brutalist type guys. But the guys started laying down their hail of fire. Trooper Love having his wonderful new heavy weapon specialist ability, which allows him to, whenever he attacks someone, they have to make pinning checks. So he's shooting his flamer, hitting multiple people, and they have to make pinning checks, even if they're not set on fire. They have to make pinning checks, which is like, well. And the group did actually quite well, though Commissar Barca took quite a few wounds off these guys. He was knocked into grits, but they captured one of these guys alive. And they requested information off him. I was like, okay, what are we going to do? And I was like, okay. And he said that they had been hot there. One of the players recognized that they were from a mercenary unit. So they asked who had hired them. They said the guy who had hired them, there was a representative called Principal, like his name forgets me, I don't have the notes in front of me, but there was this guy called Principal whatever who had hired them, and they were doing a raid on this ship. So it's like, okay, fair enough. So they had Medic Blackthrone, who was back, returned to the unit, but his player wasn't there. They had him remove this individual, bring him back to where they had been holed up. Give him something to do, really. I did his medical test before he left. But she identified where this guy was. And she's like, right, we're going to take this guy alive or dead. At the very least, if we can't do that, I need to be able to eyeball this guy, maybe see if we can figure out who the hell is hiring these mercenaries to do this. So, okay, move forward. But eventually they found on there, and I said, right, when we're doing the fight, I don't want to be dealing with, there's 100 guys here, 200 guys here, and it's like, okay, so we're just going to deal with what you guys have to deal with to do these things. And they had to deal with 6 of these guys in the light enforcer carapace, one of whom had a meltagun, and then this individual with he was wearing robes, wearing robes, and had this staff thing. And he leveled the staff kind of like he was hip shooting, and a beam erupted from it. I just kind of think he was saying the beam erupts from it, and it hits one of the armsmen of the ship in the head, and even if it didn't hit, it just seems to disintegrate and destroy his entire head. So the player's like, well, a couple of players knew the character. Crap, he's actually put us up against these. It's suspicious, but like when they saw things like, oh no, or they're like, you're gonna kill us, we can't fight. He's like, yeah. Some of you might die, but I don't think you can fight these. One of them anyway, just one. So they started setting down a hail of fire. Commissar Barca and Sergeant McBrander started running hell for leather forward, and Trooper Love moved forward close enough so he could fire his flamer. One of the enemies got set on fire and rolling around the ground on fire for most of the fight, slowly burning behind their barricade. And they're fighting, some players taking up cover behind crates as some of the other guys move forward. And it was pretty cool seeing the guys all just like desperately trying to take these guys down. And they got some pretty good, like they continue to combine fire, because you need to combine fire to take down guys who are well armoured and well equipped, because once you get the dodge burned off, it's so much easier. So they fire in their attacks. And you had Corporal Jorgensen fire with his he couldn't fire he was going, I'm going to fire my long lads, even though you don't win a half action because he moved into cover. Like, well, maybe try your Deathlight, because your Deathlight can go semi-auto, and to be honest, it's better if you're not actually aiming because of how accurate it works. So he tries it. He cracks off semi-auto while he's moving into cover, and he manages to take one of these guys down, just putting in the volley of shots. Like, all 3 shots hit, your man didn't dodge any of them. 3 shots from a Deathlight is pretty deadly. Even if you're in like Light Enforcer or Carapace, it's a pretty nasty thing, and he rolled quite well for the damage, and this guy was put down, dead. But in the second round, you had a very interesting situation where Trooper Love brought up the Meltgun. He switched weapons with his comrade Katrina, or Katarina, I think it's Katarina, not Katrina, Katarina, and he brought the Meltgun up, and he aimed it at this guy in the ropes and fired, blew, and described, yeah, you've blown a huge chunk. He did ridiculously good damage. He blew a huge chunk on the side of this thing, and I think he's gonna collapse. There's no way to survive that. But then he kind of rights himself a bit, and then you see kind of maggots kind of trickling down, trying to like reform the whole of where it is slowly trying to reform. The guy's like, what the hell is this? So you had Commissar Barker and Sergeant McBrandir going forward, engaging the enemy in close combat, all the while getting fired at, taking significant damage. Sergeant McBrandir, his player, quite worried because his character took a lot of wounds from one volley. These are full auto weapons, and the guys using them they've got a pretty decent ballistic skill, and they got a few good rolls. To be fair, one of them, their weapons jammed straight away. He rolled 100 or something, and just like weapon jam. He's like, I knew he was. And then one of the guys goes, I'm gonna fire that. You know, so it's pretty cool. But before this bad guy could get a go, it was Corporal Jorgensen's go, and he brings up his long las, levels it. He takes just a slow breath in, and he fires the weapon. Hits bang. I believe it was in the arm. He did really good damage, and it's like, okay, that's enough to actually bring him down fairly well. So it's like, okay, I'm going to describe it as, you hit him and he stumbles backwards. You can see someone seems to have caught fire from the energy from the las bolt, and I see him burning. He falls over and he knocks over one of the crates that's there, and it seems to be full of explosives. So I describe Commissar Barker and Sergeant McBrandir. They kill most of the guys. The guys are going to run at this stage. So I described, cool, we'll do the thing. And the guys just diving back at it, you know. Sergeant McBrandir just kind of, you know, he doesn't do like going for like he usually does. He just uses the pommel or the handguard and just drives it straight into the guy's face he was trying to hit. He's not doing a huge amount of damage compared to the blade, but it was unexpected, and knocks him back before he dives away. We've described Commissar Barker leaving the bolt pistol blowing off the head of this guy, because the fight was the worst. I said we'll do kind of a cool round. They start running away or whatever. This individual was now on fire, fell over, knocked over a crate which is full of grenades. So the guys just started running back, and there's a huge explosion. After this, Agent Black says, I think I've seen enough. I think I have enough to go on. So they start to leave the ship. They go back to where Medic Blacktron is, get their medical healing and get their equipment out. And she says, okay, we're not leaving through here. We have another way. They go to an airlock, but before they leave, she takes out the data slate, she puts something in, and there's an explosion back where they had been holed up for weeks. And they get onto a Aquila lander, and they're waiting to Aquila lander for weeks once they detach from the ship. They don't know the fate of this ship. They don't know exactly whether the attack by the mercenaries and their unusual enemies. At one stage, Sergeant McBrandir asked Agent Blacktron, do you know what we might be, what kind of things we might be dealing with? And she said, I have suspicions, but I don't know for sure. I was like, would you want sharing information? And she said, you'll sleep better at night not knowing the amount of things that could potentially be. She's like, you're better off not knowing that some of these things exist. So eventually they get back, and because of warp time dilation, a long period has travelled, almost another year has passed, and they come back to find, I left the session after the thing, they came back to find that there was a new unit whose heraldry looked somewhat similar but wasn't exactly the same as 13th Kinog. That the 1st Kinog Light Infantry, a low-born unit, had been raised. And what really the dagger in the back really for them was when they saw these posters of some of the other images of them standing in the different poses, because they asked them for like a couple different poses. On one side you have the 13th Kinog, there are different members represented, and the other side you have the 1st Kinog Light Infantry. And they were being used as poster boys to promote this new way of going about things that this lowborn unit would be fighting. They felt betrayed. They felt like they were stabbed in the back. But we'll continue on our tale from this point and see how our heroes fare with their new allies sent from the home front. Their unwanted allies. I'll see you again next time. Goodbye.